With that, I will again welcome everyone, ladies and gentlemen, to the 131st meeting of the National Petroleum Council and the second virtual meeting of this council, and I'm sure we all hope the last. Nevertheless, welcome everyone. If no one has any objection, I will dispense with the calling of the roll. For the members of the council, the online registration will serve as our official attendance record. We also have a YouTube audience that has been invited to watch the live stream of our proceedings. This virtual audience includes members of the public, press, and other individuals who are interested in this council and our work. I would now like to introduce you to our virtual head table. We're pleased to have, of course, the Honorable Jennifer Granholm, Secretary of Energy, Darren Wood, NPC Vice Chair, Ryan Lance, Chair of the NPC Agenda Committee, Brian Dunn, Chair of our Finance Committee, Jim Hackett, Chair of the Nominating Committee, Jennifer Wilcox, Acting Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, and of course, Marshall Nichols, the longtime Executive Director of our Council. Let me begin by updating the members of the Council on our meetings with the Secretary. We met with her in May, shortly after she took office, to review possible study topics, which resulted in the hydrogen energy request that we will consider later in this meeting, and of course led to ongoing discussions about a potential second study on reducing greenhouse gases from the natural gas supply. Also, at her request, the co-chairs coordinating committee met with the Secretary virtually last week. At that meeting, we had a very useful and candid conversation acknowledging both the importance and the incredible complexity of the energy transition. Council members are, of course, eager to meet the needs of the changing energy system in coming years and the current challenges of post-pandemic energy demand. Finding a path forward for reliable and affordable and lower carbon energy is a direction we all desire for this nation and the world. The Council stands ready to assist this administration in every way that we possibly can. With that said, our first order of business is to hear from the Secretary of Energy, the Honorable Jennifer Granholm. She served as Governor of Michigan for 2 years, and prior to that was Michigan's Attorney General. A year ago, she was nominated by President Biden to head the Department of Energy, and in February this year was sworn in to be the 16th and just the second woman Secretary of Energy. With that, we're honored to have you, Secretary. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Larry, for the introduction. Friendly amendment. I served as governor for 2 terms, not 2 years. And every single one of those years was a term in and of itself. So just a slight amendment. Anyway, thanks so much for all you do as the leader of the National Petroleum Council. And thanks to all of you who are joining us today. I also want to welcome the new members who were recently appointed. I look forward very much to hearing your insights on the state of the energy market and the risks and the opportunities that are ahead. And I do want to start by acknowledging how much I appreciated really the opportunity to speak with some of you during last week's co-chair coordinating committee. It was candid, and I'm really grateful. I'm all about having candid conversations because that's the only way we work together to solve some of the biggest problems facing not just our country, but our globe. So thank you for that. I also know that there are some deeply valuable perspectives represented on the full NPC, and that's why I'm so glad to be able to spend some time with you today. So what I heard from our co-chairs meeting last week is that your industry has been contending with some serious challenges. That's especially true when it comes to increasing production. There are struggles around financing. It takes time to get through permitting and to get infrastructure in place. This is the best country in the world to do business, but even here, getting through all the wickets is hard. So I want to emphasize, and this is part of what we discussed last week, that by and large, the issues around current production do not stem from decisions made by the Biden administration. As I mentioned last week, there are over 9,000 permits for extraction on public lands that are sitting unused. And there are over 23 million acres of leases on and offshore that are sitting idle. And so while I understand that you may disagree with some of our policies, it doesn't mean that the Biden administration is standing in the way of your efforts to help meet current demand. And so my message to the public from the White House podium is the same one that I will reiterate to you here today, which is that consumers, as you know, are hurting at the pump. And with inflation, and energy is a big part of that, and you clearly have some important tools to alleviate that pain. So I hope you'll hear me say that please take advantage of the leases that you have. Hire workers, get your rig count up. Right now, just to be clear, we are averaging, the Biden administration is averaging higher approval for leases on public lands than the last administration did, because our objective is to meet America's energy needs even while we transition to this new future. So one of the things I heard loud and clear last week in the co-chairs meeting is that it was important to take the uncertainty of the crude oil export ban off the table. And as I'm sure you saw, the administration has responded. And I can report, as my White House colleagues shared last week, we are not considering reinstating the ban on exports. And I've heard you loud and clear, and so has the White House, and we wanted to put that rumor to rest. Now, at the end of our meeting last week, I was also asked whether this administration wants progress or a fight. And I'll reiterate what I said. I do not want to fight with any of you. We do see, though, some of the things that some of you are saying out there, or some of the organizations that are funded by some of you. And I do think it's much more productive to work together on future-facing solutions. And I really appreciated what you said in the introduction, future-facing solutions rather than making this administration a boogeyman. So my goal is to make progress on addressing climate change and deploying clean energy while keeping energy affordable and reliable. Both have to happen. And these are goals that many of you have told me you share, and we can do this together. We know climate change is happening. We know climate charged super extreme weather poses a massive threat to the long-term health of this country, but also to your businesses. I mean, Hurricane Ida alone cut U.S. oil output by up to 30 million barrels, which is the worst loss in 16 years. I mean, in other words, the cost of inaction hurt you too. But I also want to focus on the great fortunes that await if we get moving together in the same direction. And I've said this before, the global market for clean energy technologies just keeps growing, $23 trillion by the end of this decade at a minimum. I mean, the potential is enormous, and all of you are uniquely positioned to reap the benefits, even considering the headwinds that are facing oil and gas. And I know that so many of you realize this and are moving in this direction because it's reflected in the actions that you have taken to widen your energy portfolios, including, for example, the joint effort to build a world-class carbon capture and storage hub in Houston, Darren. And I even got a call. I've been talking to a number of you. I've seen what you are saying and doing. And I got to see Air Liquide's work in hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cell technology when I visited one of their facilities earlier in the year in Houston. We need more. We need more. We need more of you pursuing those kinds of efforts. I'm not lecturing at you. You see what's happening. The Department of Energy is ready to help you raise your ambitions and work together. The last time we met back in May, I did talk a little about the incredible alignment between the fossil energy industry's workforce and infrastructure and technical know-how and all that's needed to harness, for example, as some of you've heard me say this before, geothermal energy. I mean, cracking the cost questions around geothermal would just be a game-changing development. And nobody is better suited than oil and gas companies who are already drilling experts. So I hope that we can work together to make that happen. Let's work together to bring down the costs of a range of promising technologies. For example, our Energy Earthshots initiative is all about commercializing the next generation of clean energy sources. Two of them would be groundbreakers for this industry. Our hydrogen Earthshot, we are aiming to lower the cost of clean hydrogen to $1 per 1 kilogram in 1 decade. Our carbon negative Earthshot is aiming to reduce the cost of CO2 removal to less than $100 per net metric ton. I've already asked you, as was described, to undertake a study on how we can scale hydrogen deployment, much like the excellent roadmap you put together on CCUS a couple of years ago. And I sure hope to see that request move forward. I know you'll be considering it. I hope you'll seize on the other opportunities to get these technologies market ready, starting with the demonstration projects that are supported by the bipartisan infrastructure law. Huge opportunities there. Granted, I know this is all going to take some time, but there's so much that this industry can do to lower emissions in the here and now. I know the council has discussed a new study on the topic of reducing methane and other greenhouse gas emissions from natural gas, fully in favor of that. I've been encouraged to learn that some of you are already taking really concrete steps to address methane leaks in the supply chain. We're working on this ourselves in support of President Biden's methane emissions reduction action plan. We're awarding $35 million to 12 projects that are focused on technologies to remove methane emissions. I know Jen Wilcox is on today, and she'll be shepherding those efforts. There are over 100 countries that have taken the global methane pledge to cut methane emissions 30% by 2030. So, that is a huge market opportunity as well. And when you add it all up, I think you will see that our focus is really on growing the energy pie. What we need is more energy, more affordable, reliable energy, and we need more and more coming in from clean, zero carbon sources. So that's why, on top of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we do need the rest of President Biden's Build Back Better agenda. It just makes little sense for this administration to stand in the way of oil and gas production as we come back from this pandemic. And just as that would make little sense, it does make little sense, I think, it would be short-sighted for the oil and gas industry to try to hold back clean energy deployment tomorrow. So, we want to work with you on this. Obviously, you're seeing it everywhere, that there's global momentum behind this transition. There is just no holding it back. When I was governor of Michigan for years, we battled the CAFE standards, the corporate average fuel economy standards for cars. And then came the more fuel efficient imports. And we still battled the trend. But the consumers spoke, and look what happened. This weakened U.S. auto industry during the recession went bankrupt, and the suppliers went bankrupt before that. The biggest bankruptcies in U.S. history. That near-death experience woke us up. And so we decided to diversify into Car 2.0, which is the electric vehicle. And now those automakers that were so fiercely supportive of making sure that the CAFE standards were not out of touch with where they were going, they are now pledging to have half their fleets electric by 2030. So, as the old saying goes, as the hockey fans in Michigan recite, you always want to skate to where the puck is headed. So many of you are doing this, I know. I just wanted you to hear directly from me. I just hope that the rest of you will be part of this Energy 2.0. And I know for some, that is not going to be easy. I know for all, that's not going to be easy. And I know it's not going to be painless. But I firmly believe that for those who embrace the change rather than fighting it, will be rewarded on the other side. So going forward, I hope we will not allow ourselves to get caught up in pointing fingers at one another when we disagree. Instead, I hope we can keep pointing to the future. So thank you for your candor. Thank you for working with me. Thank you for being part of this council and for working together on solutions.
Thank you very much for your comments. They're appreciated as always. The secretary has graciously agreed to take comments, so we appreciate that. Of course, with the challenge of managing a virtual meeting of this size, we ask council members to send in their questions in advance, and we have some. I will start it off. Last week, we listened to Dan Jurgen, who, as always, is eloquent. In his Atlantic Magazine article, he talked about how the transition to energy will be complicated. To get the reliable, affordable, low carbon energy is going to require an unprecedented advancement in technology, in investment, in consumer behavior. The list goes on and on. At the same time, we must ensure that our existing energy sources are adequate to support that transition until we get to the new economy. So my question to you, Madam Secretary, is how can we best focus on our efforts together on this progress? Do you have any specific ideas in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I do. And I thank you for this question because it gets to this notion of growing the energy pie. I mean, since January of this year, just as some example, the Department of Energy has put out over $2.5 billion to support clean energy research, development, demonstration, and deployment, RD&D. We've got over $40 billion in loans available for large-scale clean energy infrastructure projects. I mentioned earlier that the bipartisan infrastructure law, that includes funding for clean energy demonstration projects like we have never seen before, $21 billion for next generation technologies like carbon capture, clean hydrogen, storage, and that Build Back Better Act is going to add levels of funding for clean deployment that we've never seen before through a combination of tax incentives and rebates and grants and the like. So, you know, this administration is doing everything we can to improve technology and incentivize investment and guide consumers toward clean energy products, even as we work to ensure that Americans have reliable access to affordable energy right now. So I think that together we can work on, you can help first by ramping up production in oil and gas and keeping prices affordable. And we certainly are open to conversations around what we can do to address the challenges that you're facing on that front. But most of all, we should be taking any and every opportunity to work together on clean energy innovation, to figure out how to maximize your expertise and minimize emissions. I know that a lot of that starts with communication, and I appreciate this. So let's keep having those conversations and identifying ways to help each other. But I'm telling you, the technologies that have been funded in the bipartisan infrastructure law are in many ways right up your alley in terms of partnering on zero carbon strategies like clean hydrogen. And in addition to that, in that second piece of legislation, for those of you who have expressed interest, for example, in capitalizing on your expertise in offshore platforms, being providers of offshore wind capabilities, there obviously are oil and gas companies that have transitioned fully into this space. We're going to need to build that. I mean, the jack-up ships, the technology, all of that you do already can be used in this new space. And as I mentioned, geothermal, you all are such experts in pinpoint drilling. We've got so much geothermal beneath our feet. And you may have looked at this years ago and discarded it because maybe the fracking technology, you weren't thinking about it. But I'm asking for a fresh look at this because there is so much subsurface energy that is clean and renewable beneath our feet that you guys hold the keys to. All of that is to say, we can do both. We can provide reliable energy and we can invest in new technologies and we can partner together on the things that make sense and provide opportunity for both citizens as well as your industry.
Thanks. Appreciate those comments. With that, we'll move on to ask others their questions. I will call upon you when I do. Identify yourself and your organization for the benefit of the secretary and for the record. I'd first like to recognize our Vice Chairman, Darren Wood. Darren?
Thank you, Larry, and good morning, Madam Secretary. Good to see you again. Darren Woods with ExxonMobil. You've touched on, I think, that I know in my conversations with the industry players, we're very engaged in trying to develop carbon capture and storage. Clearly, one of the areas, hydrogen, advanced biofuels. And you referenced some of the legislation, some of the money that's being funded into some of these important technologies. Question, Madam Secretary, in terms of advancing research and looking at ways to lower the cost for some of these critical technologies, I was wondering if you could share your department's strategy or approach to how we most effectively channel that research money into advancing these technologies so that collectively, society and the industry specifically can lower that cost, deploy those technologies, and deal with what the real challenge here is, which is the emissions of our energy system. Thanks. Nice to see you again.
Thanks, Yaron. And I'll ask Jen Wilcox to chime in too. Let me just start by saying I'm super glad you raised it because it just shows how much of a difference this bipartisan infrastructure law is going to make. Our efforts to implement the law are underway, and that's what I'll ask Jen to say a word about. But while it's early, we're already working to align our base research and development programs with the technologies that the law focuses on. So when it comes to CCUS, for example, the I think it's $12.1 billion that has been set aside in the bipartisan infrastructure law is really unprecedented. And to make the most of that, we're going to be harnessing the capabilities of our 17 national labs and various research institutions that are also developing novel technologies for CO2 capture and dedicated storage and conversion into products like concrete. I mean, essentially, we're looking at technologies and technologies with high potential to reduce costs and trying to find opportunities to test out those new techniques or technologies at power plants and at industrial facilities. And we're going to be working to build hubs for carbon dioxide removal and hydrogen, as you're aware, which will similarly work to commercialize some of the advances that are uncovered by the research and development side. So we'll be leveraging 2 decades of investment in carbon storage to support the development of commercial transport and storage facilities. And it gives us a great opportunity to partner, since we could use power plants or industrial facilities that you operate as sites of our demonstration projects. I don't know, Jen, if you want to say any more about the implementation side.
Sure. Thank you so much. I think you actually covered a lot. Really what we're looking to do is recognize that just as the Secretary mentioned, we've been investing in carbon capture over the last 2 decades. And we have 3 successful demonstration scale projects like the Air Products project in Texas, like ADM in Illinois, that's coupled to the first Class 6 well for dedicated CO2 storage in the United States, in addition to Petronova. So we have 3 successful demos, and we need more. We need more of these demonstrations. And so we're going to leverage the infrastructure funding in order to look at broadening the portfolio of approaches, focusing also not just on coal-fired power plants, but also natural gas-fired power plants, in addition to the industrial sector like cement and steel. But we also need a place to put the CO2. And so we need to expand our Carbon Safe program. Today in the United States, we have 5 projects associated with Carbon Safe. We need more than 5. We need to look at regions like Ohio River Valley, more in North Dakota and Wyoming, and also the Gulf Coast and in Texas, where there's existing infrastructure that can be leveraged from the oil and gas industry to reverse the flow of carbon back into the earth. And so looking at really leveraging all the expertise that we have already invested in, and also a lot of the expertise that's here in this meeting today.
Secretary, on new and important studies for the country. I'm the president of Tessellation Services, but I also have the great pleasure of chairing the board of NuScale Power, which you are putting a bunch of money behind for advanced nuclear. And I want to thank your department for that support. And we just announced a potential public offering of that entity, which will allow us to access additional outside capital in addition to what the Department of Energy is doing. So we're very excited about where that is headed. I had a question regarding the oil and gas business. So
in our approach to achieving these goals, right? There's far more need for investment in research and development and demonstration and deployment of clean energy and carbon reducing technologies. And it gets back to what I was saying earlier. I really believe that any company that increases focus on advancing clean energy is strengthening the argument for investors to buy in on their future. And one partner you can always turn to is going to be the Department of Energy. We're always looking to support promising clean energy projects, and few players out there have the means and the expertise, as you noted, to bring some of these projects to life. The Energy Act of 2020 and the bipartisan infrastructure laws really spell out the U.S. government's priorities around energy innovation. You know, we've talked today about some of the areas that DOE is particularly interested in, from clean hydrogen and carbon capture to geothermal and methane reduction. So I hope we can find work together on these. I hope we can, we can get started on the demonstration projects in the bipartisan infrastructure law, which will require significant private sector industrial partnerships to make them come to life. And we want to tap into the great, scientists and researchers that you have embedded in you to be able to achieve that. Jen, I don't know, do you want to add anything on that?
I could just say quickly, one of the things that we're also focused on is when we think about hydrogen production and clean hydrogen, or we think about low carbon electricity, we're also making sure that we couple to the feedstock, that we understand how the fossil fuel is produced, and also understanding the emissions associated with it, which is why it's also exciting that this group is considering methane and also the greenhouse gas reductions associated with fossil fuel production. And I mention this because there's actually research in that area too, that we need to, although we have the tools to monitor and understand where the leakages take place today, and we have opportunities to fix those leaks, there's also a lot of work to be done in advanced monitoring, advanced sensing, so that we can have predictability associated where the leaks might take place. Not to mention continuous monitoring across, across the sector, to be able to not just understand one well, but to understand the portfolio of wells across a basin and in a region, to really be able to understand, what are the emissions associated with how we extract fossil fuels out of the earth today, and make that extraction as sustainable as possible to minimize those emissions. And that's a really important piece that we are invested in, and we want to make sure to not decouple the fossil fuel feedstock from how we use the fossil fuels for energy generation today.
Good. Okay, let's move on to midstream infrastructure, which of course is a critical part of our industry. A question from Alan Armstrong. Alan?
Great. Thank you, Larry, and good morning, Secretary Granholm. Thank you again for spending time with us on these important topics. My question relates to infrastructure permitting, and certainly specifically the National Environmental Policy Act and what can be done to improve there. If we look back at the National Petroleum Council's 2019 infrastructure report, which was labeled Dynamic Delivery, we certainly at that time recognized the need for infrastructure, which was mated right alongside the carbon capture report that you referenced earlier. And I think we continue to see that as a really big challenge in terms of getting a much more efficient permitting process. And I want to emphasize that in that report, and I think speaking for the industry in general, we're not looking for lighter standards. We're not looking to pull back on what we want to accomplish in terms of environmental quality and public engagement standards, but we are looking for a much more efficient and reliable process as we get to that. And so really, under any scenario that you lay out for energy transition, infrastructure permitting is going to be absolutely critical. And I think maybe one of the most important things that we could tackle from an administrative and a policy perspective is getting the infrastructure permitting process streamlined. And so my question to you is, and I know you really do appreciate this issue, but I'm wondering how the National Petroleum Council can work with the Department of Energy in really bringing forward a voice towards streamlining our permitting processes for infrastructure.
This is a great question. Thank you. I know Ryan Lance raised this last week as well. If we want to deploy clean energy technologies at scale, we got to improve the permitting process. And I know it frustrates many of you. It frustrates certainly me. I hate bureaucracy with a passion. And while I respect the goals of the layers and layers add waste, honestly, and time, even though you want to achieve the right ends. So it's already on our radar. You know, we're working with our sister agencies on this. We know that we have to engage partners in the states as well, since they make key decisions on infrastructure siting and approval. Let me note that the bipartisan infrastructure law made Fast 41 permanent and expanded its benefits to more types of infrastructure projects. And we know, to your point, that we're going to need, you know, CO2 pipelines. We're going to need hydrogen infrastructure. So, you know, there is no doubt that we've got to do this. And that bill, it also encourages DOE and the other federal agencies on that Fast 41 Permitting Council. It encourages us to prepare, or it exhorts us to prepare one joint environmental impact statement, not sequential, but one. So the hope is that that improves speed and coordination and transparency, and of course accelerates. So I can also tell you that you know, DOE and other agencies are looking at more focused tools that can help us speed infrastructure deployment. So earlier in the year, DOE made over $8 billion available in loans for transmission projects, for example. So DOT issued new guidance to enable the use of existing rights of ways, for example, for siting transmission lines, so that we can take advantage and leverage the double goals of whether it's road building or the putting up of EV infrastructure, charging, or transmission, and or broadband. I mean, all of that requires digging. And so, you know, in the spirit of dig once, we want to be able to leverage existing infrastructure to be able to make that happen. You know, for offshore wind, we're considering interagency agreements involving the Department of Energy and the Coast Guard and the Army Corps and others, which could help clarify respective jurisdictions and improve permitting and approval process for offshore wind facilities, which is extremely complicated. So, you know, we really welcome your advice as well, particularly on areas like hydrogen and what that infrastructure looks like, CO2. And, you know, you all have direct experience with the permitting process, and you've got a sense of where and how things can be improved, and you've already written a report on it. So let us stay in communication about this, because it is very, very important.
Good. Let's shift a little bit and focus on hydrogen. Our last two questions really have to do with the hydrogen. First, Mike Graff. Mike?
Thanks, Larry. Secretary Granholm, Mike Graff with Air Liquide, thank you so much for being with us again today. As you've already mentioned, deploying clean hydrogen at scale is key to the clean energy transition. The path to achieving the at-scale production of clean hydrogen is different depending on the production method. For electrolysis, it clearly requires the scaling of production facilities, infrastructure, as you've mentioned, and renewable power. For steam methane reforming, the focus is really on reducing the carbon intensity through carbon capture while preserving both the economic benefits of natural gas production, but also the co-produced natural gas liquids that are so critically important to the nation's chemical industry. How can DOE and the NPC work together to ensure that federal support and investment in hydrogen is inclusive of all hydrogen production pathways in order to advance the overall clean hydrogen ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And this too, I will ask Jen to weigh in as well. But let me just say that, you know, it's if we're trying to get to zero, when we say clean, we're talking about zero carbon, right? So that means if it is a natural gas, if it's steam methane reforming, we have to make sure that both CO2 is captured as well as methane leaks are addressed. You've probably seen some of these studies that have come out recently about blue hydrogen, and there's a lot of blowback about it. So I want to be able to prove them wrong, that we can button it up, and that we can do, you know, hydrogen that has, natural gas as the feed, but we're going to do it in a way that is zero carbon emission. And this is why we've done this hydrogen earthshot. It's to reduce the costs. Obviously, electrolyzers are the big costs on green hydrogen, and we want to continue to bring down those costs. But it is also why there is such a big emphasis in the bipartisan infrastructure law about demonstration projects that will get us to this end, so that there may be several vectors of research and deployment that we need to attempt in order to get there. I can tell you that hydrogen overall is the number one issue that when I talk with my counterparts in other countries that people want to see resolved. I mean, whether it is, it converts into green ammonia, hydrogen as an energy carrier is just seen as a very important part of that silver buckshot, I'll just say, and we want to make that happen. Jennifer, I don't know if you want to say a word about how that partnership can happen.
Yeah, no, I think that absolutely. So I think that we do need to think about these hydrogen production processes as holistic too. When you look at steam methane reforming, you do have to ask where's the steam coming from and making sure that that process is also decarbonized. Looking at forward-thinking processes like autothermal reforming, where you can get deeper reductions in a single process, for instance, and they're not separate in terms of decarbonization. But also, I think it's important that we have to think about the future and aligning with net zero carbon goals, and that we have to also ask ourselves, what are we doing with the hydrogen? Are we producing power? Is it a feedstock to a synthetic chemical or fuel? Is it used for fertilizer? And thinking about, too, the transition to green hydrogen, because we need to move down the cost curve on green hydrogen as well. And so when we invest in infrastructure associated with blue hydrogen, are there opportunities to transition to green hydrogen in those locations too? Is there an abundance of low carbon energy, for instance, for electrolysis? Is there water available for electrolysis? And I think bringing these together in a way that's forward thinking to align with net zero is really critical.
Good comments, thanks. Our last question comes from Mike Worth with Chevron. Mike?
Secretary Granholm, this is Mike Worth with Chevron. Nice to see you this morning. As you mentioned, the department is poised to play a key role in advancing the deployment of low carbon hydrogen, as are many member companies here and those not represented that have extensive experience in producing and handling and using hydrogen, particularly, as Jen said, in steam methane reforming, traditional methods of hydrogen manufacture, but also experience with developing industrial projects at scale. And so my question relates to the Infrastructure Act and how DOE will activate some of the additional authorities that were included in that, including support for hydrogen hubs. And so really two questions. If you could comment on how the hydrogen hub concept, along with other provisions in the Act, will support some of the work you've already referred to, like the hydrogen earthshot. And then second, the Infrastructure Act had a requirement for a hydrogen strategy and roadmap. And our company is going to, subject to the rest of today's meeting, end up in a leadership role on this hydrogen study. I'd be interested in your comments on the hydrogen strategy and roadmap and how that might align with the NPC's hydrogen energy study. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. And we hope it will align, because we would love to have that study be informing the roadmap. Jen, I'm going to ask you to speak to the specifics on the roadmap, but the hydrogen hubs, we know that there are regions of the country that are already organizing around this. I mean, I know, Darren, I'm looking at you. But we also know that there are areas that and are looking at different colors of hydrogen. So there are some areas that are looking at pink from nuclear, and there some that are looking at blue and some that are looking at green. And I would say the hydrogen hub concept, and I think we're going to be putting out very soon a notice of intent, right, Jen, on getting feedback from areas that want to, or areas and entities that want to provide input on the strategy. To inform, to make sure that we're doing this and thinking about it in the right way. I do know that as we consider these hubs, we want to consider not just the zero carbon strategy, but also how those hubs impact communities, and particularly disadvantaged communities. We want we've got this Justice 40 commitment that 40% of the benefits of the investments must address either fossil communities or communities in transition or communities that have been disadvantaged, particularly by fossil extraction. So that's going to be an important aspect of our consideration, as well as making sure that there's community buy-in. Some of the strategies that I've heard people are talking about, again, we haven't selected a particular strategy yet, but I'm just giving you some ideas of what inputs should be considered. Some have partnered, for example, in their nascent thinking with HBCUs or MSIs in trying to make sure that that we're considering, particularly communities of color. Making sure that there is a robust jobs component is going to be important. I know you're asking maybe for a more technology roadmap, but I just want you to know sort of the variables that will be, I think, considered. And then the final thing I will say, and then ask Jen to comment, is it's very interesting to consider combinations of technologies. So whether it's hydrogen and, carbon capture, whether it's, some some industrial decarbonization strategy that is coupled with an existing plant, as I was mentioning before. We are interested in creating hubs that respond to a variety of issues and technologies. So, Jen, do you want to add anything?
I'll just say quickly, in terms of the hubs, it's really about, number one, sourcing the hydrogen. But as I mentioned before, as we lock in infrastructure, making sure that we can lock it in so that all forms of hydrogen, whether it's pink or turquoise now, which is biomass sourced, or green or blue, that and I'll also say the end part is also important. What are we using it for? Are we using it for direct reduction of iron for clean steel production? Are we using it to create low carbon or low emissions ammonia, for instance, for fertilizer? Is it used as a feedstock to also manage carbon to produce synthetic fuels or e-fuels, for instance, that can help with the aviation sector, really hard to decarbonize today? Or is the hydrogen used for regional transportation, or is it used for power? And so recognizing all of these different areas that we can use hydrogen, we also need to realize that we need to be able to store hydrogen on a large scale. And that's going to be a challenge. And one of the things that we're doing in our Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management is really leveraging the expertise, and this group knows it well, is subsurface storage. And looking at that also in terms of siting hubs such that we can store hydrogen in the subsurface on a large scale in order to be used as a feedstock for all of these different applications. And again, it goes back to kind of the carbon management hubs. It's the same types of regions that are heavy in industry today. So like the Ohio River Valley, maybe the Gulf Coast, right, which is, you see all of the refining, of course, and also in Texas. And so in these same kinds of regions, we just need to make sure we understand, like, if we're locking in the infrastructure, that we're locking it in not just for blue, but for these other opportunities as well.
Okay, very good. Thanks. That concludes our questions, but I did get one note from Dan Jurgen, who was, Madam Secretary, noted your comments, answers to Jim Hackett's question, and he has a request that you pass on your comments to the financial regulators so that they do not inadvertently push production offshore, which certainly is in the interest of the country as a whole. So that concludes, Madam Secretary. Thank you. We appreciate your taking so much time. We note that and duly appreciate that.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks to you all. You bet.
You bet. We will now move on to administrative matters, which are necessary. And we're going to have three different administrative issues that we need to vote on. After each report, you will have the opportunity to answer a poll that will, whether you will approve or disapprove or abstain if you wish. We'll leave the polling open for a moment and then we will move on. Our first administrative item comes from the Agenda Committee, which is chaired quite ably by Ryan Lance. Ryan?
Thank you, Larry. And wanted to really inform the council that by letter dated November 8th of 2021, a copy of which was sent to you on December 6th, the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, who you just heard from, formally requested the National Petroleum Council to undertake a study on the deployment of low and zero carbon hydrogen energy at scale through the value chain. Now, pursuant to the NPC Articles of Organization, our chair, Larry Nichols, referred the Secretary's request to the NPC Agenda Committee for our recommendation as to whether the request is proper and advisable for council consideration. Now, the Agenda Committee unanimously found this request to be fully consistent with the scope of the study as envisioned by our co-chairs coordinating committee in its report on new study topics for the council to potentially undertake. I reported our initial thoughts on potential topics at last December's council meeting. Our final report was approved by the co-chairs coordinating committee and sent to you in late February 2021. Now, as you may recall, the council's chair, vice chair, executive director, and I met with the secretary last May to review the work of the co-chairs coordinating committee, and we all agreed that the hydrogen topic was the leading candidate for council study. Following further review by the department, the secretary issued the study request before us today. Now, you heard in the secretary's remarks this morning that the department is working on 2 earth shots, one of which is hydrogen. So she expressed her expectations for this help the study could provide on the deployment of low and zero carbon energy, hydrogen energy at scale through the value chain. So accordingly, I'm pleased to report that the NPC Agenda Committee has found Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm's November 8th, 2021 hydrogen study request to be proper and advisable for NPC consideration. So Larry, that completes the report of the Agenda Committee. And on its behalf, I move the council accept the Secretary's hydrogen study request. Thank you.
I'd second that, Larry, if you need it.
Yep, thanks. Now we now have it moved and seconded. Any questions from anyone? It's going to be hard to see on the website, but if you do, raise your hand and I will try and call on you. If not, I will call for the poll to be open. And it is now open, so everyone can vote. While we are doing that and waiting for the polls, I just have to say a few more comments about our second request, which is to reduce greenhouse gases from, yeah, I have trying to get my own answer poll in, which is greenhouse gases from natural gas supply chains, which of course our industry has been working on for some time. And the Agenda Committee is going to review that request and provide its recommendation in due course. Our Articles of Organization permit us to proceed with that study if the Agenda Committee recommends it favorably, and if there's not a council meeting coming up in the near future, which of course there will not be. So we anticipate that that study will probably get kicked off here shortly. The results are now in on the agenda and it is approved. The hydrogen study is approved. In anticipation that that would be approved, we've already started working on that study, and I'm pleased to say that Mike Worth with Chevron has agreed to chair that. So Mike, thank you very, very much for that. That's going to be a very interesting project. And if anyone wants to volunteer, if you don't volunteer, the long arm of justice might reach out and grab you anyway. But certainly if you want to volunteer on that study, it should be very interesting. Next is the Finance Committee, which has been headed by Brian Dunn for some time, but quite capably. Brian, your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In addition to reviewing periodic performance reports throughout the year, the Finance Committee has met twice this year to discuss council's finances. Once in late August and then again yesterday afternoon, where I'm proud to say we had 100% attendance, which indicates how committee retains it and is still very engaged. Our August meeting included a review of the calendar year 2020 draft audit report, as well as the IRS Form 990 with Johnson and Lambert Company, the council's outside auditors. The auditors provided us, the council, with a clean opinion letter, which agrees that our financial controls are sound. Yesterday afternoon, the Finance Committee covered a variety of topics, including the 2021 year-to-date status and projected year-end expenditures, as well as the contribution collections. The council anticipates 2021 spending to be just under the budgeted amount of $4 million, which includes a continuation of many discretionary cost reductions adopted back in 2020 at the onset of the pandemic. Contribution collections are currently anticipated to exceed 85% of the amount requested. The council's officers, the Finance Committee members, and staff understand the financial stress the contributions represent and greatly appreciate the council members' unwavering support, especially over the last couple of years. Yesterday, the committee also discussed and agreed upon the proposal for the 2022 budget in the amount of $5,313,000, which assumes that the council's ongoing operations return to normal and provide resources to begin the newly requested hydrogen study and the likely second study on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. While the proposed 2020 budget represents an increase over the 2021, I call it the lockdown budget, the total spending is consistent with 2018, a year in which the council also conducted two major studies. Finally, the Finance Committee recommended total funding request from membership for the same period of $5,313,000, with individual request amounts based on the NPC's approved formulas. This increase is, of course, necessary as the council returns to normal operating levels and ramps up the activities for those two critical studies. The Finance Committee and the NPC management recognize the recurring economic challenges that face the member companies of this council, and accordingly, we have worked diligently to scrutinize the council's annual budget by line item to capture learnings and bottom line efficiencies from our recent past to minimize costs wherever possible. The council's management is being proactively frugal while being responsible to the council's mission. I believe that the 22 budget reflects those efforts. And subject to the approval of the budget today and the contribution recommendations, the council will send the individual 22 contributions out to the members early next year. So members, I encourage you to respond expeditiously upon receiving your respective funding request. But a note, there's some of you still out there that have not paid your 2021 contributions, and we'd ask that you please consider doing so promptly so we can get those monies in before year end. And Mr. Chairman, that completes the report of the Finance Committee. I move that it be adopted by the council membership.
Thank you, Brian. I'll just second it, and we'll move on to the vote. While we're doing that, I would like to make a couple of comments. One is to thank the membership during this really difficult time. We had virtually no one who did not pay their dues and maintain the financial strength of this organization. And that is really critical to keeping us in the position we're now in, which we're in a great financial position to undertake these studies and move forward with this administration. I'd also particularly like to thank Marshall Nichols and his staff, who did a really wonderful job of jumping into it with both feet in terms of reducing the budget and keeping control of this organization, making significant reductions to the budget, their staffing, payroll, whatever have you. That really puts us into this great position. The polling has been concluded, and I'm pleased to report that the report is unanimously approved. With that, we will move on to our nominating committee, our third and final administrative matter, and that is a report from Jim Hackett, who chairs that committee. Jim?
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. The committee met, and want to thank ahead of time those that are willing to be nominated, particularly to lead the organization. The first of those nominations is for MPC Chair Darren Woods, for MPC Vice Chair Alan Armstrong, for the Agenda Committee, Deb Kaplan, Bob Cattell, Greg Garland, Ray Hunt, Jeff Miller, Gretchen Watkins, Bill Way, Bill White, Mike Worth, who will be busy, Dan Jurgen, with Ryan Lance serving as chairman still of that group. For the Appointment Committee, we recommend the following members: Nick Akins, Gorder, David Grzebinski, and I'm messing that up, as you know, John Hess, Terry Jacobs, Mike Lynn, Pierce Norton, Lorenzo Simonelli, Scott Tinker, and John Walker, with Vicky Howleb serving as chair of that committee. And as the at-large members of the co-chairs coordinating committee, we nominate Rusty Brazil, Willie Chiang, Kim Green, Mike Graff, and Frank Verostro. And I'll put that in the form of a motion, Mr. Chairman, if that pleases you. Thanks.
It does. I will second that, and we'll start the polling for that question. While we're doing that, I would just like briefly to reflect on my 2 years as chairman of this organization, which have been rewarding but challenging because of the difficult times we've been in. At the beginning of 2020, we were full of questions and expectations for a new administration when COVID hit us all like a ton of bricks. And we had to pivot from really making much forward progress to preserving this institution that's been around for 70 years and keeping it in the great condition that it's now in, so that we can move forward. Pleased with that work. Sorry it was not a opportunity to do more creative work moving forward, but it certainly got us in the great position that we're in now. I'm pleased to report that I see the report that a majority of the unanimous vote that is all in favor of the report from your committee. Jim, thank you very much.
And Larry, thank you for all you've done. We all
appreciate that. Darren Wood is now chairman of this organization. Any comments you wish to make?
Thank you, Larry. I'll do my best to follow the standards that you've set in your tenure, and look forward to leading this organization. It's a real honor to represent the men and women of the industry, and as we just talked about with Secretary Granholm, a lot of challenges lay ahead of us, but I also think a lot of opportunities. So look forward to working with the membership and with the Department of Energy to try to advance our agenda. So thank you, and thanks for the vote of confidence. Appreciate that. Thank you, Darren, for taking this on. It should be an interesting and challenging and worthwhile time. With that, our agenda is now complete. And unless there are objections, I will call the 131st meeting of this organization to be adjourned. Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience and attention and in this meeting. We're adjourned.
Thank you, Larry.